being that this is a personal branding podcast, what I love to do is start with my guests' backstory, what their personal brand and story is. So walk us through, because you're in the realm of authenticity, which is so apropos to everything personal branding. So I'm really going to enjoy this conversation today. But I want to understand, how did you become kind of this, if you will, authenticity expert? Because it's kind of a unique field. So what's your story, and how did you get into authenticity?
Yeah, so I'll talk about the three stages that got me here. So first of all, my background is my parents are Chinese immigrants who fled China because of the Cultural Revolution. People are starving in China. So I was born and raised in Brooklyn. But it's interesting. The phenomenon is that I was not American enough when I'm in America. And when I went to visit my family in Hong Kong and southern China, even before I open my mouth, if I go to a restaurant or a clothing store, because the way I dress, the way I carry myself, even if I speak fluent Cantonese, conversational Cantonese, they know I'm not Chinese. So I wasn't Chinese enough in China, and I wasn't American enough in America. So who is this real Nancy Lee? I was really confused as a kid, as you can imagine. And then the next piece was then like in the work world, right? Like figure out like, ooh, who am I? And in Asian culture was just very hierarchical, right? Like if you know exactly where you stand based on maybe gender and age and elderhood and prestige. But then in the work world, what's interesting is that you're supposed to treat your manager and your manager's manager is like peer, right? You don't use any hierarchical words, but then you know they have total power over you. They can determine your promotion, what kind of projects you get, who you get to work with, who you don't get to work with, right? So I was like, oh, so how do I fit into this world, right? And then the third piece I'll throw into this whole authenticity thing is when I actually wrote a children's book. When I do 10-day silent meditation retreats. And after this meditation retreat, I was like, I want to write this children's book. And I was like, this is totally left field. So for your listeners, my background is I was a biology major in undergrad. I went to get an MBA. So I was a business consultant in the pharmaceutical industry. So I have like no right to write a children's book in so many ways, but yet a part of me really wanted to. So I spent a whole year doing that self-publishing. And I started working with nonprofit afterwards, because what am I going to do with all these books? And working with kids, I just see they're so genuine. They tell you right away if they like you or not. And they tell you if they're sad, they're happy, they're angry, and there's no like putting on a mask. So when I started working with them, I just felt like, wow, like adults maybe have lost touch with these qualities, right? Qualities of openness, play, wonder, mourning, and celebration. And so this all came to a head and last year when I was like, what would I like to do with all this stuff? And I think authenticity just started to come clear and clear to me is that because I've done the work to, at least some of the work, a lot of the work to figure out who is Nancy and where does my authenticity lie? I want to then help people get closer to their authenticity. So when I started my business, authenticity wasn't the only thing I was seeking. It was really interconnection. But when I start playing with different words and saying, the elevator pitch, which, as an entrepreneur, a sales business person, you have your elevator pitch. You know how you start playing with different elevator pitches?
Yeah.
When I say like, hi, I'm a coach who helps high achieving professionals who struggle to be authentic and feel connected in their relationship, I start getting the head nods. And I start people coming up to tell me things like, oh yeah, my mom told me that I was using my work voice on her. Or someone said like, oh, my son has autism and he's so real in this world, but he needs to have training to be accepted. So I think the work that you're doing is so important. So I think I'm onto something when people start beyond the head nod, start having meaningful conversations with me about their authenticity and times when they do and do not feel authentic. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's the part I love there is you brought up about kind of reconnecting with your like childlike wonder and honesty, if you will, where early on, yeah, we 100% kind of come into the world and everything's new and we don't understand there's like these social rules and norms that get put on us over the years where we feel as though we can't fully be honest, or like there's, in some cases we can be honest, but other cases we maybe have gotten, a slap on the wrist for being too honest. And so we start to put the pressure on ourselves to like fit into societal norms. And so then that
Mm-hmm.
starts molding these masks that you were talking about. Can you kind of speak to that a little bit more in terms of like figuring out, reconnecting with that child and kind of becoming more of that honest person again? Is that something that like you help people find, or like how can we do that essentially?
Yeah. So I actually have three principles of working with clients. But actually, before I go there, I would actually even want to level set the field because people use language. Language is so wonderful and complicated at the same time. So, what is even authenticity? So, I'm curious about you. You've done multiple interviews with people. What is, and you're really into it. What is your definition of authenticity? And I would like to share mine.
Sure. Yeah, I actually had an entire podcast episode a couple weeks ago, a couple months ago, where I really dove into this concept. So for those who want to re-listen to that, the full extent to it. But how I'm defining authenticity is more from a scientific approach. Again, being this is brand science, but there's like three layers to it. One is your story, and this is a little bit of like nature and nurture, but some things that are just going to be when you're born, this is just who you are and how you're going to be, regardless of environment. But then there's things that obviously play a factor into what your story is, and that's environment, that's how you're raised, just things that are your life experiences that happen to you. And so that helps shape who you are. And then your story then uh, is shapes things like your values, your beliefs, your opinions, things that basically are kind of like the core firmware of your soul, if you will. And then those
Hmm.
things shape your image, and your image is your appearance, behavior, and communication. And those are the outward things that we see. And so when all three of those things are aligned, that's where I believe authenticity is working at 100%.
Mm,
But is the long-winded answer. But there are kind of safe zones where we can adjust some things and still be authentic. Opinions can change, beliefs can change over time based on like our story. My long-winded response to it is basically when your core values, beliefs, opinions align with your outward appearance, behavior, and communication.
yeah, awesome. And I don't think it's long-winded because this is complex. Being human
Yeah,
is complex, and
sure.
authenticity or being inauthentic is, has a lot of conditioning and social context. So yeah, that's cool. I like how your perspective is multifactorial and comes from different perspectives. Yeah, and similarly enough, I think I do have those elements too in my definition. So my definition is the authenticity is the ability to show up with all parts of ourselves, parts that we like, parts that we don't like, parts that other people like, and parts that other people don't like, with openness and tenderness. So note that this is an ability, because some people say you're either authentic or you're not, right? You either got it or you're not. And I don't believe in that, because if you think about it, then nobody comes out of the womb saying, I'm going to put on a mask, right? They're pretty, children in general are pretty authentic. So I think the ability to be inauthentic, to put on a mask, is something we have to learn. So we want to then take off the mask. We also have to learn it. So it becomes
Hmm.
an ability, which I
I
think,
I think that,
yeah,
and there's an element of courage in that too. I always say like to take off the mask because, as you
yeah,
mentioned, part of that is showing up with the parts that maybe in our mind we believe other people don't like, and sometimes maybe that's more so us thinking that than truth. But to then take off the mask requires the courage to say, as you're saying, like I'm going to show up regardless of whether
yeah.
people like it or not.
But courage and practice, right? So it's if it's we're always running on courage, it could like fire up or fight, or freeze system, right? If everything I need to do in this life is always requiring courage, I'm gonna get burnt out soon. So courage is great at the beginning, but ultimately it's about practicing and building the trust, meaning that I trust that I can show up this way, and that if it's not well received, I can then adjust, right? But that doesn't mean I have to hide myself totally. And I think we live in a world where people like say, yeah, go be brave and be courageous, which is great to run on adrenaline, but long term we cannot bank on it. So the idea is to keep practicing until it becomes a trust. something I could just relax into versus always having to run into, right? So
Yeah.
that's my perspective about authenticity. We could learn it, and it could be renaturalizing ourselves to who we were, right, in a way, but not completely childlike. I don't believe we want to be a total child, because children, for example, really young children, when they hit somebody, they don't realize that hurt somebody because they don't have that sense of self and other yet. So I'm not encouraging people to be total childlike and just like go hit things and not realize their actions have ramification. And I think in a way, when we become authentic as adults, what's actually more complex and beautiful is that, unlike a child who only focuses on the self, because that's all the standpoint they have, adult could actually be authentic and still consider other perspective. And that's called empathy, right?
That empathy. You mentioned an idea of not being courageous in the beginning, but then over time having that trust that you can still show up authentically, and you can kind of shed that courageousness at that point. What needs to take place in order for someone to get to that point, right? Because initially it's, I'm going to show up authentically, putting myself out there, like it or not. And then, trolls can start coming into the comments and giving their 2 cents, or, not
Yeah,
funny or whatever, right?
yeah,
And so to then, usually at that point, people are like, okay, I mean, we're specifically talking about personal branding and content creation, that's
hmm,
going to happen. So usually at that point, people are like, oh, all right, crap, 1 sec. Okay, yeah. In the spirit of authenticity, the reason that we now have this camera angle is because my camera just melted on me. So that's why we always have a backup camera. But yeah, as I was saying, so yeah, in the world of trolls and people kind of trying to shoot you down for being authentic, which is crazy.
hmm,
Um, Usually people at that point might stop and go, okay, maybe this isn't for me. I can't take someone, bashing me like that. And so it would take like another element of courage to then show up again, even
yeah,
if you are getting those comments. At what point, what can they do, or at what point are we able just to show up regardless of, those trolls in the world?
yeah. So before I dive into the three principles, which will then let you know how I work with my clients to get from that stage of needing to hide or put on a mask, I do want to say, like, I'm not saying that you need to show up authentically all the time. And sometimes it's like there are times when it's not wise to show up authentically, right? So that a work situation, let's say you have news that is terrible, but yet it hasn't been announced yet. And because that you're at a certain level, if you let people who are at different levels know, it will have an impact on them, right?
Mm.
So being authentic is that I have some information, but I can't share it yet, right? Versus saying, I need to tell you what I have all the time. So that's one point. And the second point about authenticity is that Brene Brown brings up a point about headlighting, like a deer in a headlight. Sometimes we think when we use authenticity, then we create these like wonderful relationships right away, right? But the other person is like, wow, I just met you and you give me all this authenticity. I feel like a deer in a headlight. While the giver might think like, oh, I'm being so close to you because you know about my trauma and my past and all my deepest, darkest secret. But that's not how relationships are. You can't just jump from zero to trusting them right away. It's about showing up and knowing that person shows up consistently for you and you for them, that they can hold your story because your story needs to be honored, right?
Mm.
So Brene Brown talks a bit about that. So I'm just going to leave with those 2 points and then dive into the three principles of my work. Like, when you're in a tough situation, whether it's at work or people trolling you or even a relationship, you feel like you need to hide or maybe step back. What do you do? So these are the three principles of my work that I work with clients. First is to focus on what works. Our brains, like your brain science, tend to be Velcro for the bad things and Teflon for the good things, right? Like, we remember this one person who stiff us our money and then like give us like didn't split the bill right, but then the hundreds of times that you split the bill, like you're like, okay, it went pretty well, right? Or
Mm.
the person that one time didn't answer your call when other people have answered your calls so many times, right?
Right.
So focusing on what works, even though it's hard, help us then reacclimate our brain to say, yeah, the world is not totally a terrible place. They're not all trolls, right? Unless your feed is all trolls,
Yeah.
then yeah, that's pretty
You got to
bad.
fix your algorithm.
It's
Yeah.
probably been like hacked, so you need to restart your program,
Yeah.
or someone's out to get you. Then yeah, but the
Right.
reality is that trolls and people who leave you hanging are very, very small percentage. But it clouds our mind. So what among all this crappy things that's happening, what is working? And then taking that what's working and like try to widen the periscope, the view, so you could then go into the next level of like what can work, right? So that's the first principle, focusing on what works. And
Mm.
not to force it, not to be like, oh, well, like somebody did something shitty, but at least like I still have food on the table, right? I'm not starving like other children in Africa are, right? So I'm not
Mm.
trying to say that. It has to be genuine versus this like I'm forcing myself to focus on what works. The second is connecting to the self with tenderness. Meaning like even acknowledging like, wow, it feels horrible when someone's telling me that I'm a terrible person. They don't even know me. It feels horrible when my manager doesn't see what I contribute and focus on this feedback that like says I'm incompetent, or my significant other isn't acknowledging how much work I do around the home, right? So just even saying that these feelings exist, and if you have trouble with feeling words, just like I have this like pang in my chest, I have this ache in my neck, and can I maybe even put an arm on it, or touch my chest, or have a friend, like find a way to connect with tenderness. And for me, what I do is I use a method called inner child. So the inner child, let me first clarify it because it's been very popularized, and let me define it. Again, definitions is so important. It's not the part of you that got really traumatized and you want to go back and rescue that part. It's also not the other part that you live your best life and you want to recapture that moment. Is that if we were to be a young being that's nourished and taken care of, certain qualities bubble up, like those qualities I saw: wonder, openness, play, warmth, mourning, celebration, right? They're naturally in us, but how do we connect to it with tenderness? And the last principle is the idea of the smallest next step. Sometimes where we are and where we want to be or who we are is just such a big leap. And sometimes it's not. Maybe it's a small thing, but oftentimes it's like, I want to go to the gym every day, but I don't even walk like 5 blocks on average. So how can I go to the gym every day? And it sets us up for failure. I'm not saying don't have the vision, but then make sure that like there's small steps to get there, and try it on for size, because your small step and my small step is different size, David, because you know you're not taller than me.
Sure.
But literally what works for you and what works for me are different, right?
Yeah.
Like, so what gives you hope and jazzes you up is different than mine. So if I keep
Mm.
on walking in your steps only, David, at one point I realized like I'm not walking like Nancy. I need to start walking like Nancy. So what is the smallest next step I can take to even find like what do I enjoy? What works for me?
Sure.
So do any of these resonate, or what do you think, as you've also been thinking about authenticity? How do people get out of that hole of like I'm not authentic or people are trolling me?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think largely the first area that I know on my own kind of journey as it continues to happen is a largely just self-reflection to understand what authenticity means specifically for me, not like defining the concept of it, but more so defining, who David Polikoff is as a person. And so, a lot of times that's difficult to do on your own, is what I'm finding, is like there's certain things I can look in the mirror and try to have like an honest conversation about,
Mm-hmm.
and try to like journal about and understand who I am. But it's so easy to then go into real life and try to apply it as a practice, but slip into some of those old masks, or do things that we don't know that we're doing like subconsciously. So I found that largely having someone who's close to you or you're able to interact with, who's able to kind of like be a third party spectator and
Mm-hmm.
analyzer to things, to kind of show you, okay, you might feel as though you're showing up in this manner to the world because that's like how you maybe feel in here and in here. And for those who aren't watching, I just pointed to my brain and my heart. But you, to others, you might be coming off completely different. I mean, that's kind of that's the definition of branding too, is branding is trying to correlate two concepts together, like your offer and what you want to be known for. And for us, when we show up, we think we might be coming off in a certain way because that's just like maybe internally how we feel, but others are perceiving us a different way. So I always find that kind of having some third party inclusion in the journey is helpful as well, to be like,
Mhm.
here's here's how we see you, here's kind of the quirks that you do without realizing it, here's the things we love about you, here's the things we wish you would optimize in your life. So that's why I feel sometimes it's difficult to do alone.
Yeah.
But that's
We
that's
need
one
we
area
need
that I usually
mirrors,
start.
right? We need like loving mirrors or mirrors that's not going to trash us when we're down. Absolutely.
Yeah, and them needing to be honest and comfortable and confident with being able to provide that feedback
Yeah.
is, yeah, definitely necessary, because some people just don't want to hurt your feelings or whatever. But it's easy for other people to say like, here's the things we love about you, but then to maybe say like, here's some things that maybe you could work on. It's sometimes also difficult for other people
Yeah.
to talk to you about.
Awesome. Yeah. And that's why things like coaches, right? You're a coach, I'm a coach. To
Yeah.
have people hold that space, have some structure, but also some objectivity, right? Ask questions that maybe your friend or family member would never ask you. Not because they don't care, but they're dealing with their own thing, but maybe also they haven't had training and perspective, right? So one tool I find incredibly useful for me as a coach is nonviolent communication, right? Helping people understand like what are your feelings and what are your needs. I don't use that type of language. It's able to reflect back what I heard, even though that person didn't say those words. This is what they're experiencing, right? And when a person feels seen and heard, man, it feels so good, right? To not having to like front it, to not having to fake it. And then I say, like, this is what I'm hearing you really express and say. It's like I can see the relief like come out. I'd be like, oh man, you got me in a way that maybe my friends and family haven't, or maybe they're not, um, they don't have the courage or they're scared of showing. Right.
Yeah.
So I'm hearing that from what you say, it relates to that objectivity, but being seen by someone else feels really good.
Yeah. And I mean, largely going back to the idea of having the confidence to initially come authentically, the best result you can have is, not everyone needs to resonate with it, but having at least your niche resonate with it to the point where someone comes to you and says, I want to work with you, because all other skill set and value being equal, I just thoroughly enjoy you as you. And I want you to be my consultant. I want you to be my coach, because I'm going to spend time with you. And
Okay.
I don't just want to trust that you can deliver, but I also want to like you because I'm going to be spending time with you. So for you to show up like warts and all, and then have people then kind of reward that by saying, I want to work with you because of how you are, and that's what makes you unique from the competitor that I was thinking about using. Like, that's just so relieving to people too. It's just this idea that that's your ultimate reward, is like your unique selling proposition as a personal brand is the thing that no other competitor can compete with you on, which is like the authentic you, how you approach things, how your mindset works, how you communicate. So it's really like, at the end of the day, that's the personal side of personal branding. So yeah, that's like, it's the ultimate reward for being authentic.
Yeah. And I think you're touching upon the really why does authenticity matter in personal branding, right? Why does authenticity matter at all? So for me, I've thought about this and I have three reasons. First is that authenticity, it really helps a relationship. There's like an ease and flow, right? If I'm showing up the way I am, you're showing the way you are. There's an ease in the first in me. Like I don't have to put on a mask. I don't have to do another layer of analysis. And if you show up the way you are, I could then say, I don't have to do another layer of analysis of you. Then there's just relationships are just so much easier when there's authentic. So, like your personal branding, you show up as you authentically, the relationship with whoever you want to be with, whether it's a vendor, a client, you know, a corporation, it becomes easier. That's the first point.
Mhm.
The second point is that authenticity contributes to safety. You keep saying liking someone. I think liking someone is because maybe we feel safe, right? If you show up as you are, who you are is who I am is what you get. Then I could lean into that trust and be like, oh my gosh, I know he's not going to screw me over. Then I feel safe. And when I feel safe, I'm willing to open up more and I build more trust. And it's like this virtuous cycle. So I think authenticity is really tied to safety, not physical safety. We're not living in the wild anymore, but psychological safety, emotional safety. I'm pointing to my head and my heart too, for those
Mm.
people who can't see. And finally, the last thing of why authenticity matters for personal branding is that it feels good. If I open that email and I talk, or I'm meeting you in person or read whatever you wrote, and it's associated with authenticity, and I know I'm getting a certain flavor, not always the same flavor, but the flavor in the same realm every single time, it just feels so good. Because it's like eating, it's like I said, I love vanilla ice cream. And every single time I open your email, I'm getting vanilla ice cream. Like, yeah, I get to have another helping of vanilla ice cream versus like, for my example is like, I don't like mint. So I open your email and nothing against mint. It just reminds me of eating toothpaste. I don't like it. So if I open your email, it reminds me of the mint, ice cream. Not that mint ice cream is not great. It's just it's not for me,
You're
right?
not a mint chocolate chip fan?
I'm not a mint chocolate chip fan. So the authenticity is there. Like I
Yeah.
know when I open Dave's email, I'm going to get vanilla ice cream and I love vanilla ice cream, but I
Yeah.
don't like mint chocolate chip ice cream. So I'm not going to open Sam's email. And that's authenticity because your authenticity shows and I'm selecting you authentically too. So it's a two-way street. Yeah. So that's
Yeah.
why it matters. The feeling, the safety, and it promotes just relationship ease. That's why authenticity matters.
Yeah. No, I love that. And it sounds like there's kind of a through line there too in terms of like comfortability, because it sounds like, your first point being that I feel comfortable showing up as myself because you're showing up as yourself. So there's like, it's the comfortability. And then if you continuously are doing that, then there's a consistency there. And consistency also grows trust and comfortability because, like you're saying, if you show up every single time and you get the same person, then you know what you're going to you know what to expect. It's like going to your favorite restaurant and always ordering the same meal because it's always consistently good or whatever, so you just love that restaurant just for that one meal essentially.
Mm-hmm.
um so yeah, the comfortability. And then like you're saying, if you can create a comfortable workspace, then what I've learned over the years too is like that relationship you establish with your client, if there is that trust and comfort level, they're sometimes more lenient too in terms of the actual deliverable as well. Obviously, you always want to show up and give 150% for your client, and you want to try to maximize like the value they get from it. But life happens, things happen that are out of your control, where sometimes maybe the service doesn't go as planned or 100%. But if you've established that kind of comfortability with your client, they can sometimes be a little bit more lenient in like being a bit more forgiving with those types of things. Like you have rapport with that person. And I feel like the rapport, that type of relationship isn't established as easily if you put up a wall between you and the client and you have like
Mm-hmm.
work you versus like authentic you. And it just feels more like this is like account manager Jane or Jim who's just there to like, make a paycheck or whatnot.
Yeah. And what you're hinting at, I'm also is like making mistakes, right? That whole like more lenient and forgiveness because we're human. Ultimately, we all make mistakes. And being authentic doesn't mean like you're perfect. And the reason why I'm bringing this up is that when you're authentic and people know, at some point we all make mistakes, but they have enough consistency with you that they could be like, oh, this is an anomaly. So, John Gottman of the Gottman Institute, he studies relationships and romances. I think there's a certain ratio of positive experiences with negative experiences. In this case, it's romantic relationship where within like watching a video of two couples arguing, like 5 minutes without sound, they had like, I think 85% accuracy of this relationship is going to work out or not. Right. So again, the ratio of positive experience to negative experience, I think is like 5 to 1, at least 5 to 1. So again, if we show up consistently saying like, hey, this is who I am, and then we consistently have good experiences that are way greater than 5 to 1. When something does happen, whether I'm a person or a brand or a company, the our receiver or our clients or person we're in a relationship with be like, oh yeah, that was a mess up. But in general, I have really great experiences and I trust this brand. I trust this person. I trust this influencer, ambassador, whoever it is, right?
Yeah. And that kind of likens to this idea of, online reviews.
Mm,
If a company has like 35-star reviews and another company has, 30 uh 30 reviews with an average star rating of like 4.7, you almost trust the 4.7 business more because
mm,
there are a varying degree of reviews in there. You almost feel it's dishonest to have like 35-star reviews. That feels almost like there's something behind that.
yeah. So
Versus
perfection
like
is dishonest, right?
yeah, occasionally you trip. Occasionally you didn't have the best experience. But like, that feels more natural to have a varying degree of something. So yeah, when you come off a little bit too polished online, and everything's hyper edited and formatted perfectly, people might resonate with it early on because it's like, oh wow, look how great this person is. But you still want to see your favorite celebrity like trip up now and then. Like there's a
Yeah.
reason that movies have like blooper reels, and blooper reels are usually like some of the most watched things because you like to see the fails as well. But we don't look at that actor and go, oh, that's a terrible actor because they like forgot
Yeah.
their line or they missed their step. You just know it was like a one-time little goof, and it humanizes them and we feel more connected to them because, oh, I too mess up. Like they're not
Yeah.
this, perfect person.
Yeah, I love how our conversation went from authenticity to now like failure mistakes because I
Yeah.
think continuing on the spread is like not only how I show up when things are great, right? And the sky is sunny and it's perfectly blue sky.
Yeah.
It's also how do I show up when things are not going well? And I think the ability to repair rupture is really a skill that like we are not taught. We're saying like, oh, we just say sorry, but the sorry is oftentimes tinge of shame, blame, or guilt, either for the person who's saying the sorry or the person receiving the sorry, right?
Yeah.
So I think when authenticity is saying like, instead of saying like, if you don't feel sorry, but you're saying like, hey, I realize my action had an impact on you, whether as a brand, right? Okay, we didn't make the best brand choice or a personal choice. And acknowledging that there was something happening. And for some people, it might have even been harmful, right? Versus ignoring it, pretending everything's okay. Then I think that takes not only courage, like you said, but authenticity and the self awareness of like my action, even though I had no intention of hurting anyone, had an impact. And actually, there was a study, I think, that showed that relationships after rupture, meaning this horrible event happened, if it was repaired well, the relationship afterward becomes even stronger, right? So
It's
if
like
you could think
when you
about
work out
personal,
and you tear a muscle and it rebuilds itself.
yeah, or
Yeah.
think about brands you trust, right? That influencers you trust or people you trust that came out and said like, I made a mistake, authentically, genuinely, not just like reading off a script and say like, that wasn't my consequence, that was not my intention, but it had consequences, and I'm here to
Yeah.
say I want to do better, and can you help me with it? Versus saying like I'm infallible and because I don't know, that doesn't work. That's not real.
Well, the interesting point you mentioned there, the key word I think there is genuine,
Mm,
because we can portray authenticity and it's almost still a mask, in a way. But
yeah.
like, I don't think you can fake genuineness because that's kind of the definition of the word. Um, and you can spot when someone's being genuine, because I always like to say like authenticity and being genuine comes from a place we don't control. I think it's like something happens, it's our immediate reaction to it,
Mhm.
or impulse reaction to it, and like that, how we react to things. I think when we talk about being authentic, like that's kind of the true definition of authenticity, is just like how we would react to something without giving any additional thought to it. Um, and yeah, when a kind of our some celebrities or top influencers mess up and then they come back and they give this like ungenuine scripted apology their PR firm
Yeah.
handed them, you can tell. And then there's times when people are like genuinely like, I get that I did something wrong and I can't believe I did that. And what is this, that, and the third. Um, I think part of that, or largely what drives that, then is like we were talking about, was like, okay, well, where does genuineness come from? And I think it comes from having the like solid foundation of what those like morals and values are, and then living through
Mm,
them. Because
yeah.
we can, again, we can have those morals and values, but if we're not living through them, then we're not being authentic. We're putting on a different show. So if you genuinely believe what you did was wrong, it's because it's tied to a strong opinion, a belief, a moral. And so you're just kind of vesseling your communication through something you truly do believe. But if you're giving this fake apology, it's because whatever you did isn't tied to an actual belief. Like you don't actually
Mm,
believe what you did was wrong. It's not part of my moral code or compass. So you have to like pretend you're someone that does have that morality and
yeah.
then play that character. So it's again going back to the idea of like authenticity and self-reflection. You have to like understand what those things are so that you can live through them first. Because otherwise, I think we're always just kind of like, trying to say that person seems like they have their shit together. I'm just going to like be that person. Like whatever that person cares about,
Hmm.
I'll care about too, so that I can just be a version of that. But I think we find like we have to do the work on ourselves first before we can show up.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. I love that perspective. Two things I was thinking about when we are talking about it. First is how I know you're all into brain science and branding science, but like you said, how we can feel authenticity, genuineness, right? And a lot of people like don't necessarily trust feelings, the F word, which is feelings. Because they're like, wow, feelings are so whimsical, right? And or maybe like I feel like happy one day, unhappy the next day. How can I trust my feelings? But what I'm saying is not to trust your feelings like necessarily only in that moment, is that consistently, if that genuineness uh, and authenticity shows up, we feel a certain way, and learn to trust that, right? I'm going to trust that when I have this type of feeling, I'm being with someone who's very authentic. And sometimes I get tripped up, but that doesn't mean in general that trust of like going into that space. I forgot my second point, but yes, you can keep going.
Well, I was going to ask you, so how we can try to show up authentically, and I want to get back to your 3 points, to talk about how you help people do that. But I also want to know, how can we spot, what is it about other people that we can say they're being inauthentic? Like, how do we, what is that feeling? You talk about feelings, like, what is that feeling? Or is it like a visual cue? Or like, because I mean, again, we want to show up authentically,
Hmm.
to get, all the positive things that we talked about. But also, we want to make sure that people are perceiving us as authentic as well. And when do we know that other people are just aren't being authentic?
Yeah. So one way is observation, is what the person doing, saying, because these are things that we can observe. We cannot observe their feelings, right? We don't, or we could see a smile, but we don't know exactly what they feel.
Mm,
Yeah, and what I'm seeing and hearing in alignment. You know how in physics, and you have vectors. If the vectors are all aligned in the same way, it goes a lot further because the
mm,
force generated goes uh, just stronger. But if your
yeah.
vectors are pointing in different direction, and sometimes in directions are at odds of each other, that force goes nowhere. That object just stays put, right? So in some ways, going back to science a bit, when I see what they're doing, what they're saying, and they tell me what they believe is all in alignment, then yes, I think is authentic, right? And
Mm,
that's why like one observation is not enough. You need enough data points, right? So the second is frequency. Like how many times am I observing it? Is the person saying, I love little kids, and the next day like screaming at them, right? But is that screaming out of 100, or is it out of like two instances, right?
right.
So the second is frequency, which then provides a context. So that's the external thing. And I still say the internal thing is that trust again, to trust how I'm feeling about that person. Because sometimes like we've been told like, don't trust those feelings, right? And how about, think about, I'm gonna be a little bit political. It's like, okay, like Me Too, right? how oftentimes a woman comes to the foreground and said, this happened to me. And people then believe in it, right? And to be able to fully like show up and like, and trust that what happened to me was a valid experience. And even though it's scary to bring it forward, I'm going to trust that when I share it, people will receive it, right? That's one more extreme example,
Mhm.
but then it also fuel a whole movement, right? To trust that when something feels not great, in this case, how certain women are being treated, to trust when they show up and it's starting to change the culture, right? And that also plays into, I think culture is a brand in a way, a collective brand that we all believe in because
Zeitgeist.
yeah, zeitgeist, like it incorporates all the things that you mentioned before, the stories we tell, the values, the beliefs, and how we show up. Collectively, culture is a brand, right? So what kind of story are we telling? And in general, are we heading towards authenticity or not? And we have to then use our internal compass to souse that out because culture is a really big voice. And but finding pockets of authenticity is totally possible even within a big voice. So yeah, I feel like I strayed a little bit, but that
No,
was
well, I have two kind of follow up
yeah.
elements because I think what you said there is great in terms of something that you can only observe over time. Um, I guess what kind of maybe way you can package it too is like you might observe someone for one time, and that gives you that immediate gut feeling. Like when you meet someone new,
Mhm.
you kind of get that initial gut feeling of who this person is, and I think maybe a large part of that is how their outward image. So it's how they dress, how are they speaking, how are they holding themselves, and we make assumptions about what their values are and their story and all that kind of stuff. I mean, different pockets of the US have different ways of talking and dressing and such. And so if you were to come in an attire that is more Southern, in a cowboy outfit, I'm going to associate you with that pocket of the US. And then I'm going to associate you with that color of state that you probably are politically and
Mhm.
like all those things, right? So we can kind of make some prejudices, if you will, of maybe what your story and your beliefs are. But we don't truly know if that's correct until we've been with you on a more frequent basis and you've shown me who you are through your consistent actions and beliefs and such. And so we can't fully get an idea of who someone is just by like, don't judge a book by its cover and all that. So I think your point about like, yeah, observing, and you can make maybe that initial hunch, gut feeling, but to really know who someone is, it requires consistency in your observation, but also consistency in like what they say and what they do, aligning. And that's where, just tying that quickly back to personal branding, which is why we advocate so much with showing up consistently, is because one piece of content isn't going to define you, and it shouldn't. So you might have a viral video that takes off, but like that's not the entire Nancy brand, just that one video. You have so much more to you, so much more to your story, and so much more for you to add. It may initially attract certain people to your page and whatnot, but one piece of content isn't going to define your entire thing. And in fact, there's many instances where people have a video that goes viral that actually is somewhat in misalignment with who they actually are, but now people just perceive them as that. And
Mhm.
so, sometimes that messes with their brand. Sometimes they now have to lean into that more and be that person because that's what attracted people to them in the first place, which is like misaligned with who they are. But yeah, that's why we advocate for like consistency, is because you need to show who you are as a well-rounded person over a series of time, and that's what's going to earn the know, like, trust over time.
Yeah, it earns the listener's trust, but also like my question is that if you're expecting your video one or two to go viral, and that's the amount of work you want to put in, if you're not willing to show up consistently, is it because the work itself is not interesting to you, right? So if you're not willing to show up consistently, even with one person or 100 million, is it because you're trying to do something to get that 100 million that you think is what is needed versus doing something that you can consistently show up every day because you genuinely find it fascinating, intriguing, interesting, it matters in your life, right? Versus, because have you never noticed, like when, for example, my parents tell me to do something, the amount of enthusiasm that I do it versus it's the same thing, but I actually want to do it is like night and day. And one of
Right.
the best management tactics or strategy is if someone brings something to you, even if you thought about that thing before, make it feel like they own it. Because when we feel like it's our idea and it's truly something we authentically love and like resonate, we will run to the moon and back with it. When someone, you have to do this, we'll walk one block and then we'll drop it, right? So I think that authenticity, the ability to show up day after day for personal branding, has to come from an authentic place. So I was like, it's really tiring. It's like carrying something that's not mine. But
Right.
when I'm carrying something that is actually mine, because I'm not carrying on the outside, it's actually internalized in me, it just like, it's easier to show up. And then I give up less easily, right? And I'm willing to try new things to say, like, if this message is important to me, what I do is really important, then my personal brand is not fixed. I can still massage the edges, like you said, right? Like a little bit about, you could change a tweak a bit area in your authenticity and then see how people respond versus saying, well, like, I'm doing this because it should give me a million likes. And if I don't do it, it sucks. I feel so deflated. So I'm just going to stop doing it because after 5 weeks, nobody's a masochist that much. At some point, they're going to be like, I'm just going to stop doing it because it doesn't bring me joy, doesn't feel good. I feel like a loser versus like, hey, like, I don't know if people like it. I'm going to try it. And if they like it, great. And if they don't, maybe I could like tweak it a little bit. So what I do at the heart still is the same, but the message might be slightly different. And then if people start nodding, maybe I'll like do a little bit more of X and people start talking to do a little bit more of Y, right? Do you see like that is a very authentic journey to personal branding versus if you have to put on a mask, then at some point you're like, this mask kind of sucks. I can't do this anymore. And they give up.
Yeah. Well, I think that the key here, I kind of want to explore a little bit here, is it sounds like there's kind of this Venn diagram of something you personally, like hedonistically find passion in and just thoroughly enjoy doing. You would show up and do it regardless, but some people just decide to record it and press publish when they're doing it. And that's like almost the smallest version of personal branding that you can define there. It's just like do the things you love, but record it and also press publish. And then the other side of the Venn diagram is like the value someone can receive from that,
Yeah.
and you empathizing with their gap between not having the thing and being able to have it, whatever it is, like whatever your service or product provides. Um, and you kind of vessel your personal brand like in the two areas of where those things intersect is like, I'm already doing this and I do it well, ideally. If not, follow my journey of like figuring out how to do it. I'll be a couple chapters ahead of you at all times. And then also for those who are interested in also being able to do that, follow along and I'll guide you on how to do this thing.
Yeah.
Generally that's what personal branding is essentially. So there's like this Venn diagram of like passion and audience empathy for wanting them to also succeed, that needs to happen there. And then I think to your point, you're saying that like when it's strictly the passion thing without the empathy, you start to make decisions with your content and your expectations of your content start to be in misalignment because you're just trying to like feed your own ego again. Like I'm
Yeah.
passionate about this thing and I want other people to see how great I am at it. So I want people to follow me so that that's my like, my indication that I'm good at it. But you're obviously not there for your audience. You're there just to like continue to feed your own ego on the idea. Because if you had that empathy, you wouldn't be looking at those metrics. You'd be looking at, okay, how many people are commenting and saying like, this helped me out so much. Thank you so much. In fact, I got a text from my buddy this morning who just like out of the blue texted me and was like, I just want to say like, I've been following your videos and you mentioned in a video about how to do this certain strategy. And I just started incorporating it. And it's been so great, whatever. Like that's those are your KPIs, your key performance indicators. Is like, are you getting those types of text messages? Are you getting those types of comments?
Mm-hmm.
And the virality side of things, I think, is more so just for like the ego boosters.
Yeah. And when we say KPI, there's both leading and lagging indicators, right? Like the lagging indicators is that ultimately, am I getting clients? Am I making money? We do live in a capitalistic world, and you do start a
Still
business
got to, yeah, you
because
still got to
to
pay for
provide,
dinner.
right? So I don't
Yeah.
want to poo-poo that. That's important.
Yeah.
But those might take longer, right? Especially if it's an area, if your clients are in areas that need a lot more education or is a new field, there's significant amount of education and investment that needs to go on before people could understand what you're trying to do, especially the further away it is from mainstream, right? But those are your lagging indicators. What you're saying, somebody like texting you or commenting, those are the leading indicators, right? And I'm not saying they happen right away, but they happen before the lagging indicators. Sometimes not, but usually. So having an idea of like, what are my leading indicators and lagging indicators that could show me if my personal branding is working, right? Is my authenticity connecting with people? And getting a note saying like, wow, I really love what you did or really helped me. Those are great leading indicators, and to frame them. Because again, like it's easy to say like, I don't have another viral video. I don't have any more clicks and likes, but like frame those leading indicators, because again, the brain is like Teflon for the good stuff and Velcro from the bad stuff. So we need to accrue more of those like great moments as much as possible to keep this journey if we want to stay on this journey, right? It's very easy to quit. And I'm not saying just because you stay on a journey you'll get it, but I think you bring in the thing about empathy is listening. What do people really need, right? And how can I really serve them and help them? So if they need X, but I don't do anywhere near X, but X is the most lucrative thing that's paying for right now,
Yeah.
then like, is that alignment versus like they need Y and I do elements of Y and I could help them. And then people could understand, well, okay, I need help with Y. If you can help me, then great. But you can't necessarily own the whole field of Y. Like, for example, like, I don't think there's anyone, like, even though I'm really into authenticity, there's other people out there who also do authenticity in different ways, right? And one cannot totally own the field. So to be able to say, like, I could work in a certain area, and there's going to be enough people who, when they see my authenticity, they'll come to me, right?
Mm.
When they see my personal branding, and there's going to be enough people, big enough pool, right, to do my work that I like or I could tolerate and still make money, make a living. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Well, speaking of that, I want to get back to the three-step process here.
yeah.
And remind me, the first step was
Focus
start,
on what works.
focus on what works. Okay. So can
Yeah.
you walk us through what that means?
Yeah. So one exercise I do with one of my clients is, at least in my practice, again, I'm going to be telling you very like what I do. Everybody find what works for them differently. I have a list of qualities, for example, in autonomy. And under autonomy might be dignity, freedom, independence. I lead them through an inner child connection exercise. It could be visualization, it could be movement, it could be writing, it could be drawing. Then after the exercise, certain qualities naturally come up. Like they yearn, let's say I really yearn for spontaneity, right? So that's finding what works. Because if something in you yearns for something, that must mean you had a taste of it before and it feel really good, or you had a lot of enjoyment or work for you. Bring it back in. So it helps you first focusing on the what works
Is
because there's
there
so many things.
is there an element? So you're saying you may have tasted it before, and now you're craving it now. Could it
Mhm.
also be that maybe you've never received it? And
Yeah.
I mean, we're getting a little bit kind of
Yeah.
a, psychiatrist armchair here, but
Yeah.
yeah.
I think even if you never receive it directly, you've seen people in the world receive it and you've said that's really beautiful. I mean, you can even see it in media, like movies. You like read a book that really touched your heart and say, wow, wouldn't it be nice to be in a relationship where I could show up fully or I could be trusted, right? So it's the focusing on what works, which could come from imagine, because some people push back on me. They said, what if I had a horrible childhood? I don't want to like connect with that. Like I don't have an inner child. I was like, great. I understand. And some people have really horrible backgrounds, but how about is there a child in your life? Do you have a kid, a niece or a nephew? Right. And can you see those, like them being very open and free and just really nourished and taken care of? And if they say no, then I say, do you have a pet? How about animals like cats and dogs or whatever animals you have in life? They are so like authentic. Feed me, play with me, scratch my belly. No,
Yeah.
get away from me, right?
My
Or pick up.
cat
Yeah.
definitely tells me when he wants to eat and have playtime, yeah, all the time.
Yeah. So your cat is so authentic, right? So, and if you're struggling with even having a pet, what I say is have somebody maybe you admire, like a role model, or even someone imaginary. Because one of the greatest thing about the human mind is that we can imagine. So even if we never had it before, we can still imagine. So does that help with the focusing on what works, please?
Yeah, so I want to kind of go into it a little bit more. So the idea here is we want to find an area or areas of our life that I guess act as somewhat of like a, how would we define it? North Star, a muse,
Yeah.
like a something that's driving a passion for us, or like a magnet for us that's
Yes.
driving us more in a direction than.
And it could also
Um,
be tenderness, right? Like the whole like openness, tenderness, like being exploratory. Because I give them lists, clients lists of qualities. So ultimately, what comes up for them shows up differently in each person, right?
mhm.
Yeah.
So yeah, if we were to say like, yeah, actually one thing I wanted to go back to is you mentioned like autonomy, and
Mm-hmm.
we've spoken before, and I think you touched on this idea, and it really stuck with me, where it's the idea of autonomy of like thought, if you will,
Mm-hmm.
being able to not feel as though you have to kind of bend and change yourself based on like maybe societal pressures, or other people's opinions or whatever. And I feel like that's almost, in a way, I feel like kind of one of the most best ways to almost to define authenticity too, is just to have like autonomy in expression or something, right?
Yeah.
So in a way, how you are expressing yourself through your image and
Mm-hmm.
what you want to say and all that kind of stuff. I've kind of discovered spontaneity is a huge
Mm-hmm.
element for me. um what's the
Yeah.
next step then, once
Yeah.
I'm able to
So
identify
this
that?
is where then I talk about smallest next step, and idea the gap between where we are, where I am, or anyone is, and where I want to be, or is a gap. So what is this upcoming week, Dave? If you want to bring more spontaneity or explore spontaneity in your life, what kind of steps can you do? And this is where, with a group of people, you could start like brainstorming on your own and then share. And if you're totally stuck, it's a collective group brainstorm. And it's really cool because sometimes people be like, you could do this, you can do that. And people are like, oh yeah, I never thought about that before. Right. So there's also this collective wisdom. So yeah, would you like to maybe brainstorm some smallest next step you could take this upcoming week to explore or bring more spontaneity to your life?
Yeah, well, I mean, my birthday's on Friday, so
Ooh, happy
yeah,
early birthday.
and I don't have anything planned, so that's
Spontaneous.
probably where I'm going to express my spontaneity.
Okay, so I'm hearing that Friday is good. Not this week. Sorry, I'm guessing. Did you say Friday?
Yeah, Friday.
Okay, Friday is a day of spontaneity. So, what would be spontaneous? I guess like I don't know, just anything you want to do that day, right?
Yeah, I mean, birthday plans, because I don't really have anything solid, but just kind
Mhm.
of yeah, getting some friends together and doing something.
So even just like waking up and say like, what do I feel like eating today, or even spontaneous things. So that's like more event-based spontaneity, which I think is interesting because there still needs to require some forethought, right? But for example, from you to get to point A to point B for your week, you could take a different route. You walk to work or go wherever you want to go every week, and you probably take the same route every week, I'm guessing. So spice it up, take a detour. It might add
Mhm.
like 5 or 10 minutes to your walk, but go down that small street during the daylight. That's safe and go down, right?
Yeah.
Or another spontaneous thing is like, what do people eat for lunch? Probably eat the same thing every most of the time, right? Do you want to maybe try a new place, right? Or maybe spontaneously break out into song and dance because you've been listening to a song in your head for a while. You're like, dude, I want to dance to it. These are just ideas.
No,
I think
yeah.
it's interesting. What you're saying is an event-based spontaneity, which I haven't had someone said before, but nobody told me it was their birthday before. So
Yeah.
yeah, like what can you do? Just like yeah, you have to plan an event with your friends. But what can you do? Maybe like when your foot hits the floor when you get out of bed, you do the first thing that your body wants to do.
Yeah. Well, I
Right?
mean, to that point, I feel like we are two things. One, as humans, we are so habit driven that habits are necessary for us. Otherwise, we'd be completely just thinking about everything all the time about how to do something
Yeah.
versus our brain just putting it into a habit. But since we are so habit driven, we need to kind of like pull ourselves out of that occasionally to mix things up. But two is also for the business owners, entrepreneurs who are listening, we get so, I think, I'm sure many of you can relate to kind of what I said a little earlier in terms of like mapping out your week and having and try to accomplish something. And that can sometimes be the only things you think about during the week is like getting from Monday to Friday and accomplishing A, B, and
Yeah.
C, that we leave kind of limited time for that spontaneity. And actually, this kind of correlates very well, if I want to tie this back into personal branding as well, is the idea that a lot of times I think so much in terms of a calendar that I'm like, okay, I'll research a topic or I'll ideate topics on Monday, I'll research it Tuesday, I'll record it Wednesday. And all of that is very, defined, if you will. Like this is structured. Like here's what I'm going to talk about, or if I
Right.
have a guest interview or whatnot. These are all just like calendar events. But in terms of like personal branding, you need to allow for kind of like the spontaneous content. You need to like remove yourself from the office and go on walks or like go to events and things outside of the calendar, and you can still create content around that stuff. But if like all of your content is so consistently templated to like the same style and the same location and such, then it doesn't feel like we're getting the full picture of who you are. So like
Yeah.
that's how I would also tie it in terms of like correlating it to um personal branding overall, but also like me specifically is if I'm too regimented, um and too focused on keeping things in a box throughout my week, then it doesn't feel as though like you get the full picture of who I am, because I need that kind of like
Yeah.
the time to be something else essentially.
Yeah. And I'll add to that for your entrepreneurs and people who are business, like spontaneity fuels creativity. Right. And we do the same things day in and day out. There's like not as much creativity. And I think creativity is a human essence. Like we want to be creative. We don't want to do the same thing every day. Yes, we want that effectiveness of having order and a schedule, but then if that's all we do, like all work and no play, right? People go crazy. So
Yeah.
it's like, how's the balance? I'm not saying you must be spontaneous all the time, because then you'll get nothing done. But where's the balance? And then I'm hearing for you, you have a yearning for spontaneity. Usually what I then have clients put on a card, index card. I want more blank in my life this week. Spontaneity, in your case, in this week. And I will explore the smallest next step. And you actually write it down and you put it somewhere where you can see it. Like your bathroom mirror, like your bedroom. You need to see it, because sometimes we forget. We actually forget to be spontaneous, right? We
Yeah.
forget to have fun. So, and then for every week, try that out. And then if you do a 6-week program with me, when I do group coaching, every week is a different topic. So I go, for example, autonomy, play, connection, meaning, mourning, and celebration. And you, at the end, you get like all these stacks of cards, because it tells you like the journey you've been on, right? So yeah, I recommend you to write it on an index card, stick it somewhere you can see every day. Whether or not you get to do something spontaneous is up to you. You don't want to force spontaneity, because that sounds ironic,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah.
But then like
I'll
to even
schedule in
remind myself,
spontaneity into my
I'm going to
calendar.
schedule spontaneity. It doesn't work that way, but even to have it in like being reminded, especially if you haven't been spontaneous, I have a practice of that, then like, okay, then, oh yeah, I want to be spontaneous. So maybe I'll walk a different way today. Maybe I'll say hi to 5 different people I don't know on the street spontaneously and see
Mhm.
what happens, right? Or tell somebody like, you have a beautiful smile. I don't know, like, or
and
you,
and the
you could kick
results
a
of
dog
this
too. Yeah. Yes.
kind of correlating this back to the authenticity side of things, like the result of this is it that we feel as though if we can kind of fill the hole, the gap of what we've been yearning for,
Mm-hmm.
is it that since that there was that hole, there's been friction in our lives that we've been trying to like mask or cover with
Yep.
things that are inauthentic. So now that we are filling it with the need, we're filling that need, it
Mm-hmm.
feels like we're a bit more whole so that the
Yeah.
friction goes away and we can then
I love
be
it. I
fully
love that
ourselves.
summary. I love it. You're
Yeah.
like getting to the heart of it. So I'm gonna give you this might be a quote that your entrepreneurs might enjoy.
Mm.
If you want to build a ship, don't drum up people to gather wood, divide the work, and give orders. Instead, teach them to yearn for the vast and endless sea. So I'll read it again. If you want to build a ship, don't drum up people to gather wood, divide the work, and give orders. Instead, teach them to yearn for the vast and endless sea. And I think as a personal branding coach and what I do too is to teach people to yearn for the sea, right? Teach people to see the possibilities of who they are and how they represent themselves in front of clients online, right? And with that yearning, you don't have to tell them like, do this, do this, do that. You can give them templates, you can give them outlines, but ultimately what authentically helps them show up every day in their personal brand, they have to yearn for it, right? And when they yearn it, you don't have to like be robots and instruct them what to do. They naturally find a way to show up authentically in their personal branding.
Love
So,
that.
yeah.
Let's I think we should end it on that because I think that defines
Yes.
everything so perfectly in the sense
Yes.
of again, kind of correlating that with what gathering the wood and all that would be is like you show up just to get likes or
Mm-hmm.
you know hear yourself talk or whatever, but it's actually the north star, the sea, your purpose, the empathy you have for your audience, which is why you're showing up, and that's kind of
Yeah.
your guiding light.
Yeah.
So this Nancy, this was awesome. I knew we were going to have a good conversation because this is just our favorite.
It's an hour and a half with some tech glitches, but I'm
Yeah,
glad. Yeah,
let's do
it
it.
meandered and I loved it. I love how you able to receive what I do and summarize in a way that's like really like compact. And I know it's your job, but you kept relating back to the personal branding. So, and I tried to bring some of those elements in. So hopefully it's helpful to your audience.
No, absolutely. Yeah, that's kind of just how my mind works. I'm like a chat GPT summarization tool sometimes where I really listen, interpret, and then spit back out my summary of what you just said. And that's how it helps me understand it because I need someone to confirm my
Yeah.
iteration of it.
Yeah.
Um,
I call it reflective listening. What you say you do, I do reflective listening, and it's a different flavor, but very much similar. Like to say, like, did I really hear what you said? Is this what you're really saying? And if they say yes, I'll be like, great. And they're like, nope, you got it all wrong. Then we're
right.
like, okay.
And it helps then with, like you said, people like to be heard. So,
Mm-hmm.
and seen. So if you can say it correctly, then you're just establishing that rapport again. So, but before we officially wrap things up, if people wanted to learn more about you, take next steps with using some of your authenticity services and go through some of the practices we even did today, how can they find you and how can they get in touch with you?
Yeah. So do you have show notes? I'm going to
Yeah.
ask you that first.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So in the show notes, you can go to my website, which is tanyapanya.com. There's a whole story behind it. I'm not going to belabor the point. If you type in Nancy Lee, Li, and authenticity on LinkedIn, I publish weekly articles. They alternate from my business page and my regular page. You could get insights about these things about authenticity, but also write about micro moments when people are really struggling, whether it's for a heartache and they put on a mask to show that they're fine, but they're not, or they really struggling with a client and they're like, dude, how can I show authentically and I don't want to like ruin this relationship, or even with it, like I need to be a caregiver of my parents now. How do I establish boundaries and tell them what I really want to think, right? So I show these micro moments because again, people want to be seen and heard. And I hope the clients could see like I could see them and I could hear them. Yeah, and I am on Instagram, but those are just, how can you fit this huge topic into like 60-second sound bites? I try. You could take a look. But if you want my longer form things, it's on YouTube. So the YouTube has my shorter Instagram things along with my longer videos. If you don't like to read articles, then you can listen to my articles on YouTube. So yeah, I'll leave it to your show notes
There you
to
go.
have all that stuff.
That's content creation for you peeps. That's you got to deliver content in different formats so that people, if they prefer to read, they'll go on LinkedIn. If they prefer to listen, you can go to YouTube. So there's the content strategy at work. Nancy, I appreciate your time today. I know we chatted for a while, and
Yeah.
it was all good things. And I know my audience is gonna love it. So thank you for your time.
And thank you for being game to do the exercise. I think you kept asking questions, and I was like, I want you to experience it.
For
I
sure.
want your audience to experience it, because sometimes we could talk about it, like we could talk about the moon, but I want to take you to the moon, and then you get to experience it yourself, and then you can say, is the moon it for me or not? Right?
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Absolutely.